If we haven't met, I'm Kyle. I'm one of the pastors here. We're big on expositional preaching because we think that it's the best way to minimize my voice and to maximize God's voice. It also exposes certain areas of our lives that on my own I would have never chosen to expose. So we play the long game. We think there is no growth like the growth you receive from systematically walking week by week through entire books of the Bible. So we have been walking through the book of Luke. Joseph Carl, who believed in expository preaching like we do, delivered 424 messages from the book of Job. Now, I assure you, we're not going to do that. We're not planning on being in Luke for 8 years. But I am taking a big section today, maybe even more than I can handle, but we're going to slow the pace down next week. So here's what I have for you today. We're working through the text in 3 movements. First, seeing the glory. That's Luke 9, beginning in verse 28. Then, exercising the glory. That's Luke 9, beginning in verse 34. Then, missing the glory. Luke 9, beginning in verse 46. Seeing the glory, exercising the glory, missing the glory. That's where we're going to be. Okay, Luke sets the scene for us by saying, now 8 days after these sayings. And I just asked myself as I was studying, what sayings? Well, Jesus had gathered the disciples and asked, what's the word on the street about me? And then he turns it around on them. He says, what's your estimation of me? They answer, and he says, we need to take a time out. We need to have a prayer retreat and talk about this on the mountain. So that's what they do. The question being asked all throughout the book of Luke is this: who is Jesus? Now, just in chapter 9 alone, Herod asked the question, who is Jesus? The crowds are asking the question, and the disciples are asking the question. And this is the climactic moment in the book of Luke where this question is answered. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up to a mountain. Now, why these 3? Well, they were the inner circle of disciples. The Bible speaks about 120 disciples, then it speaks about 70 disciples, then it speaks about 12 disciples. Here we have 3 disciples. There was a chain of command. There's a hierarchy of leadership. There's always smaller teams within the larger teams. And these 3 were Jesus' leadership team. We call them the inner circle. Now, we don't know the exact mountain they trekked up, but we know the area. They would have climbed up to the point of 6,000 feet in 100-degree heat with massive humidity. This would have been an all-day exhausting adventure, and we're not surprised to see that the 3 drifted off to sleep. The mention of sleep might indicate that this event occurred in the evening. Darkness covered the mountain. It will not be the last time that Jesus is on a mountain covered with darkness. This is also the first, but not the last time, that we will see these same 3 sleeping when Jesus is counting on them to pray. It happens again in the garden. Eventually, they are awakened by the sound of voices. When they come to, rubbing their eyes and scratching their head, they see Jesus in a conversation with 2 men. And apparently, according to the text, they miss most of the conversation, but what strikes them first is the brightness that is Jesus. We call this event the Transfiguration. And I'm trying to unpack this for those of you that have seminary degrees and for those of you who were converted in the last week, because that's what we have in this auditorium this morning. What is the Transfiguration? It means that Jesus was changed. This is not where Jesus becomes God. Jesus always was God. He was God in eternity past. The glory here didn't come down on Jesus. It was revealed from within Jesus. Jesus appeared as he would appear in the future. Now, for some of us, that's a scary thought. Knowing what we look like in the future is not too appealing. In fact, in my hometown, people would say all the time, Kyle, just look at your daddy, because that's what you're going to look like when you get older. And which is a bit scary because he's balding and in denial. So he grows his hair out really long here, and he does the comb over. You've seen this, right? And then sometimes he does like the comb over and then the swoop. It's like a vortex going on his head. I'm really not interested to see what I look like in the future, but I'm really curious to know what Jesus will look like in the future. So let's approach this with 2 questions. What did Jesus look like when he went up the mountain? Secondly, what did Jesus look like shrouded in glory on the mountain? So first, what did he look like going up to the mountain? In school, I remember having a debate with a girl named Jaquisha. I told her that Jesus was a white man, and she said, no, Jesus was a black man. Then I opened up my Bible, and I had pictures in the middle. I thought they were inspired. They were not. And it was pictures of Jesus, and he was white. And I said, look, Jaquisha, you're wrong. Jesus was a white man. And then she said, nuh-uh. She pulled her Bible out. She says, look at my Bible. She had pictures in there, and Jesus was a black man. And so, look, neither one of us were Christians. We could care less about following Christ. This was just a cultural debate that we were going on here. Years of study. Here's what I've discovered. We were both wrong. Jesus wasn't a white man, so don't picture him with long, flowing, sandy hair and blue eyes. And he wasn't a black man either, so let's not reinvent him. He was a Jew with dark hair, dark olive skin, and dark eyes. And now some of you are thinking, I'm a red-blooded, flag-waving American just like Jesus. Well, he wasn't American. He was actually a Middle Eastern. And if you have a problem with a Middle Eastern man sitting on the throne, the only thing I know to tell you is you'll have all eternity to get over it. All right, here, secondly, what did he look like shrouded in glory on the mountain? And I can't remember a time that I've struggled with preaching a text more than I've struggled with it this week. Because I'm trying to get across in words the glory of God. You know, a pretty easy task, right? But God revealed himself through words. So we're going to look at these revealed words and we're going to see the glory of God. Matthew mentions that his face shone as the sun. Same account, parallel. Luke describes his face as altered, which in the Greek simply means it was other. He points to the complete otherness of his face. He is transformed into a radiant figure whose brilliance extended even to his clothes. His attire glistened very white, as no bleacher on earth could bleach them. In fact, Revelation 1 gives us a more detailed picture of what they likely saw on the mountain. Because the Apostle John, the same guy on this mountain, later records what he saw when Jesus appeared to him a second time in glory. I want you to let this wash over you. Revelation 1 verse 12. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. And on turning, I saw the Son of Man, clothed in a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace. And his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp, two-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in full strength. Now, that's interesting. Both times that John saw Jesus in his glory, his face shined. You will remember on the cross, when Jesus died, there was darkness at midday. On the Mount of Transfiguration, there was brightness at night. His face was shining. Jesus was the midnight sun. Now, the three notice, maybe they put some sunglasses on or something, after the brightness, they notice that Jesus is speaking to someone, Moses and Elijah. Now, why these two? Why not Isaiah and Jeremiah? Why Moses and Elijah? Because both had previously conversed with God on mountaintops. Moses on Mount Sinai and Elijah on Mount Horeb. And in a sense, what you have here is Jesus standing on a mountain with the Old Testament before him. Moses, who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, we call those the Pentateuch, the Law, the Torah. And then Elijah, who represents the rest of the books of the Old Testament, the prophets. So we have the law and the prophets, and they are both testifying to Jesus. They are both pointing to Jesus. J.C. Ryle says it something like this. Moses and Elijah were the king's servants, but Jesus was the king's son. Moses and Elijah were planets, but Jesus is the sun. Now, what were they talking about on the mountain? The text says that they were talking about Jesus' departure. Now, that's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, both of these men had interesting departures. Moses died and was buried by God, and no one knows where, according to Deuteronomy 34. Elijah is one of the only two men in the Bible who did not taste death. Elijah was taken up into heaven by a flaming chariot. So both of these guys had remarkable departures from earth. Those departures were great, but Jesus will have a greater one. The second thing that's interesting is there's a play on words here, because the word behind departure is the Greek word ten exodon. And you don't even have to know Greek to recognize what I just said. Ten exodon. They were talking about the exodus that Jesus was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. So think about this, friends. They're on the mountain. Moses is saying, I'll let a great exodus of people from Israel out of sin and slavery in Egypt. And then Jesus says, yes, and I will be leading a greater exodus of my people out of the hands of sin and death. And that's what he did with his death. So as the three are watching this unfold, Peter speaks up, as he often does, and he said, let's not stop this party. Why don't we build 3 tents? And you know, a lot of people have tried to draw a connection between the Feast of Booths, like these tents were booths. I just think that's theological gymnastics. I think he's trying to prolong their stay. This is what I think he's doing, prolonging their stay. And as a reaction to this statement, suddenly a cloud appears and overshadows the mountain. It enveloped them. They found themselves buried in it. And it brings up an interesting question. Why is God always showing up in a cloud? Whenever the glory of God shows up, it's typically described with certain events, like fire, a trumpet blast, a storm, or thunder and lightning. In other words, God is not a warm and fuzzy. When he appeared to Jacob, he was a powerful wrestler. Now that's not too safe. When he appeared to Job, he was a hurricane or a tornado. Have you seen a tornado? That's not very safe. When he appeared to Moses twice, he was a blazing fire. When he appeared to Joshua, he was a man of war armed to the teeth. When he appeared to Ezekiel, you should just this afternoon read Ezekiel chapter 1, because I still don't know what he saw. It's one of the most astonishing things ever written in human literature. He was trying to describe it, and then he just went nuts. He was trying to describe something that words couldn't describe. When Moses met God in Exodus 33, he said, show me your glory. God said, I can't, because it would kill you. So again, the question, what is God doing in a cloud all the time? Well, Moitner, an excellent expositor, said, and I quote, God is shrouding, not abandoning or diminishing his glory, so that he could accommodate himself to live among his people, to grace them with his presence, which in its awful holiness would spell their destruction, end quote. And then a voice speaks. It's the same voice you hear at the baptism of Jesus. The voice actually said the same thing. This is my son, my beloved. This is my chosen one. Now, how should we respond to this glory? Because in a sense, we are on the mountain as well. How should we respond to this glory? Every time you open the Bible, you see a transfiguration. They beheld his glory on a mountain. We behold his glory in a book. And the glory of Jesus is one of the mega themes throughout the Bible. And to be honest with you, explaining the glory of Jesus causes us to strain because of the limitations of our language. But we should respond like they responded. What did they do? They fell on their face and worshiped. And so every Sunday, how do we respond to the glory of God? We fall on our face and we worship. Now, let me draw an application from one of the three on the mountain, Peter. You can look at Peter's writings. He always referred back to this moment, the transfiguration. So for the rest of Peter's life, the glory of God functioned as an anchor of the soul. it steadied him during difficult days. He wrote about it multiple times. And I could just unpack a ton of difficult days here that some of you are facing. I mean, trouble with your marriage, trouble with your child, trouble with your health, a huge disappointment. I could go on and on and on, but I will not. I will just simply say this. The Jesus you worship is big enough to overshadow every difficulty in your life. And you may be saying, Kyle, I need my situation to change. I need them to see me. I need them to appreciate me. No. All you need to see is the glory of God. And that, my friends, will anchor your soul. The old timers used to say, get under the spout where the glory runs out. I like that. God's own lips have spoken. Jesus is the Son of God. He's more important than anything. He's more important than everything. He's big enough and he's important enough to overshadow everything in your life. You cannot at the same time look at Jesus and be overwhelmed by what's going on at the bottom of the mountain. So the problem isn't there. The problem is, where are we looking? Let's get our eyes on Christ. And I actually think this whole transfiguration is a preview to what we will be like in glory. Here's one of the truths. Your identity does not end after death. Who was on the mountain? Moses. Moses was still Moses. He's enjoying his first ever visit to the Holy Land because he didn't make it in his life. Sin messes up things. But in eternity, it will all be fixed. Notice Moses did not have wings. He did not have a halo. These memes and bumper stickers that say, Joey got his wings on this date. That is just madness. You don't turn into an angel when you die. When God created you, he created you for eternity. There will never be a time when you cease to be you and become someone else. Your identity will remain after death. Secondly, your identity will be known. How did Pete, Jimmy, and John know Moses and Elijah who they were? They did not see photographs of them. They were not wearing name tags. They didn't have a shirt that says, my name is Moses. The disciples knew the identities of other people centuries before they lived. And some people ask me, will we know one another in heaven? Yes. And this has to be a great comfort to some of you who think that you go through life unknown. You sit among the crowds, but you've never felt so alone. You think nobody sees you. Here's the truth. You will be known. We are reading a book to our kids right now by Randy Alcorn. It's called Heaven for Kids. It has tons of questions. Like, will we have wings? Will we glow in heaven? Will animals be in heaven? What with a new earth and what's the difference between heaven and the new earth? Lots of interesting stuff like that. Heaven for Kids by Randy Alcorn. It's good. You can just take a question a day. It's broken up into like, I don't know, it seems like 5,000 questions, but I'm sure it's not that many. We're about 60% finished with it. Now here's another truth that we get. And this, I think, is the most unfathomable. It is possible for you to share Christ's glory after death. Now, these guys have been gone a long time. Moses had been dead 1,400 years. Elijah had been dead 900 years. Neither one deserved to bask in the glory of Christ, much less share in it. Moses had a murder on his record. It wasn't self-defense. He killed an Egyptian. When we read of Christ's transfiguration, our hearts can scarcely take God's glory in. As we behold his beauty with these unworthy eyes, we must ask, how can I partake of it? You know how? In just a few hours, the disciples will see Jesus. That same radiant face become again clothed in dark human skin as he makes his way down the mountain. And a few months later, that former radiant face will be so beaten and disfigured that it's beyond recognizable. You see, he went from glory to suffering so that we could go from suffering to glory. That's seeing the glory. Now let's look at exercising the glory. Remember in the Old Testament when Moses walked down the mountain? He was filled with disappointment because of the sin of his people. Well, Jesus is the greater Moses, the full and final Moses. And he does the same thing. He walks down the mountain into a fallen world. And I brought a picture to show you. It's a painting by Raphael. Not the Ninja Turtle. All right, the master Italian high Renaissance painter. He painted this scene. And we can see a couple of things here. Number one, Jesus is a white man. And again, I've already told you the error there. But what I want you to see the three on the mountain. You've got Jesus, you have Moses, you have Elijah, then you have Peter, James, and John. But down the mountain, because he's painting this scene in the scriptures, you have this little boy over here. And all the crowds are in an uproar. And the daddy is crying. What is going on with this little boy? Well, you heard the text read earlier. The boy is possessed by a demon. Sometimes it throws him into the water. Why? Because Satan is a murderer. The boy is covered in burn marks, scars, and scabs. Why? Because Satan causes suffering. His dad in the text actually approaches Jesus and he says, evil spirits shatter him. Now that's the word for boxers knocking someone out or wrestlers throwing an opponent on the ground. And I'm not talking about WWE wrestling. I'm talking about real wrestling, all right? I don't want to break your heart, but that's not real, all right? Some of you, that was more offensive than me saying Jesus wasn't a white or a black man. But yeah, it wasn't real. All right, so this is real. The Spirit is beating him black and blue. And as a daddy, you can picture this scene. You build a pool in the backyard and you look out to see your son face down floating in it. You rush out, you pull him from the water and you do CPR. You build a fire in the backyard to roast some s'mores. The next thing you see is your son laying in the fire screaming. You pull him from the flames. He's shaking violently. What happened, son? I don't know, Dad. This dad never slept. And he didn't sleep the night before he approached Jesus, unlike the disciples, who had a good night rest. Here Jesus gets annoyed. Now, it may surprise you that Jesus gets annoyed. It surprises me a bit. Verse 41, Jesus says, you twisted, wicked generation, you can do nothing. Now, why would Jesus say that? Is Jesus rebuking the Father? No. This rebuke is not for the Father. The Father has done exactly what he ought to do. He's brought the child to Jesus. Is Jesus rebuking everybody in the community around him? After all, he uses the word generation. Well, maybe. But I suspect that the people who are in the bullseye of Jesus' rebuke are his own disciples. Why? Because of what the Father said. I brought him to the disciples, but they could not heal him. And maybe you're thinking, I think Jesus is just being a little hard here, being a little hard on the disciples. He's angry with them, a righteous anger with them because they can't cast out a demon. And you're thinking to yourself, I don't know if I can cast out a demon. And you're going to scratch your head at this whole event until you read verse 1 of this chapter, which explains the whole story. Jesus called his 12 together and did what? Gave them power and authority over what? All demons. Now, I'm not saying that Jesus has given you authority over all demons. I'm saying he has given his disciples authority over all demons. He said, I've given you authority to cast out all demons, but they did not believe him. So we have to ask ourselves some hard questions. Like, are you doubting what God has said? Now, I want to give you two applications from this particular story. And I'm going to preface the first one. I'll preface the first one because I don't want you to think I'm crazy. All right, I'm not an old school angry fundamentalist. I have Netflix, I watch TV, we have Hulu, I like music. Sarah and I just went to a concert in Nashville this weekend. I like sports. I don't believe smoking a Cuban cigar is a sin. I think you may cough a lot, but feel free to get a tattoo. Join the rest of the 99.9% of people in our church. I'm not a hollering guy in a suit. I'm not preaching against things that aren't even in the Bible. But I do want you to be discerning when it comes to culture, because I believe that one of the ways that Satan works in our day is to convince you that demons aren't at work to destroy your life. And then to convince you that anyone who says they are some whacked out cult leaders trying to get you to drink some Kool-Aid. Here's the first application. Are you aware of the reality of spiritual warfare and the work of demons in your life? Let me make it more personal. Are you aware of the reality of spiritual warfare in your job, in your marriage, at the gym, on social media, in this church service? There are times where I can feel the spiritual warfare going on in this church service. Like last Sunday, I don't think I've ever felt it as heavy as then. Application 2. Trouble is not the exception to the rule. It is the rule. That's what Jesus is showing the disciples as he's going down into the fallen world. So we shouldn't be surprised when it comes, because we live in a fallen world. We don't understand why our boy is going through what he's going through. We don't understand why we are facing what we are facing at this moment. But we have to remind ourselves. You cannot see how what you are going through is for your good, but you can trust that it is. Don't be like these disciples. Believe what God has said. Jesus' followers looked at the cross and said, I don't see how anything good could come from this. But we know you can't get to the resurrection without the cross. You cannot get to glory without suffering. When someone tells me, Kyle, I'm not going to become a Christian. And here's why I'm not going to become a Christian. Because I don't understand why bad things happen to good people. My response is, that's only happened once. And he volunteered for it. Here's where the glory is experienced. How does Jesus cast out the demon? There's no talking TV. There's no freaky priest. There's no holy water. There's no bizarre cross. There's no voodoo. Jesus just says, demon, go, and he goes. So they experience the glory of Christ that way by the demon bouncing. But Jesus also wanted them to experience the glory of his cross and resurrection. So again, he unpacks verse 44 that he will have to suffer. We didn't have that in the reading because I didn't want us to be here reading for like 12 hours. But he's unpacking his suffering. Now, Keller likened this to a political candidate running for president, then telling his campaign staff towards the end that not only will he lose the election, but he will get assassinated. And they didn't comprehend it. Luke tells us that they became so afraid that they stopped asking questions. They understood enough to be afraid of understanding more. And you may wonder how they keep missing it. They're not seeing how things are going to play out. There's a lot of unknowns. Let me give you an analogy. Once you've seen certain movies, you cannot watch them the same again. Like The Sixth Sense. Terrible, terrible movie. I watched it when I was younger with my parents. I don't know what they were thinking. But like the whole plot is the boy alive or is the boy dead? It tells you at the end. Once you've seen it, you really can't watch the movie the same again. In the same way, once the resurrection occurs, all of these things begin to make sense for the disciples. But they see the end of the story. They don't see the end of the story like we did. Once they saw the end, everything started to make sense. And let me just throw out a little sidebar here. Verse 44, Jesus' death on the cross. That wasn't plan B. I don't care if your favorite gospel song says, and there are many of them that do, that God's in heaven and he says, we've got big problems on earth. And then God looks all over heaven, wondering who will go. And he says, what are we going to do? And then Jesus steps forward and says, Daddy, it's me. That is not the gospel. This was planned from the foundation of the earth that Jesus would come, that he would be clothed in human flesh. We call that the incarnation, clothed in human flesh, that he would live a perfect life, that he would have to die a torturous death. Couldn't just die of old age, couldn't just die something quick and painless. It had to be a violent death. The Old Testament predicted that. So he came, he bled, he died, and he resurrected. He's alive now, never to die again. So seeing the glory, exercising the glory. Lastly, missing the glory. What happens when you do not have a big view of God? Well, you miss the glory, and it will be evidenced by how you live. Most of the hurt that you're experiencing now would be healed if you had a big view of God. Most of your questions would be answered if you had a big view of God. Or you would not need the answers because you have a big view of God. I'll never forget when I finally was exposed to what I call big God preaching. Because I came to Christ at age 16, and then up until, 24, 23, is what I call small God preaching. Like reducing every Old Testament story to moral examples. Be like David, don't be like Samson, don't be like Solomon. Be like this guy when he was young, but don't be like this guy when he was old. Like reducing the Old Testament to that, making us the hero of every story. You're David, just throw your stones at your enemy and you'll defeat your Goliath. And then I was exposed to big God preaching. How God is sovereign. And how God can use bad things even for his glory. And how my whole purpose on life is not to consume it for my own sake, but to live it for the glory of God. And it changed me. Like once you hear big God preaching, you can't go back to little God preaching. It changes you. And this is what we need. Not a head knowledge, but a heart knowledge. So we have 3 stories here in these verses, 46 through 56. We have 3 stories of the disciples living like they missed the glory. Living like they were never on the mountain of transfiguration. So how do you identify if you're preaching a small God message? How do you identify if you have a low view of God? Well, I think there are 3 ways. First, you jockey for position. The scene opens up with the disciples sounding like Muhammad Ali. Oh, I'm the greatest. Oh, I'm the greatest. I'm a bad man. And Jesus, who's not party to their conversation, nevertheless knows what they're thinking in their hearts. They had an overestimation of self. They had an underestimation of God. They took themselves very seriously. They were very ambitious, but it was all about advancing self. They had a high view of self, and they had a low view of the greatness of God, and consequently, their pride got the best of them. Jesus, to teach them a little lesson, he brings a child, puts the child by his side. The child was literally at the right hand of the king, the eternal king. If you were invited to a dinner in this day, you were invited to recline next to the host. If that were the case, you were in the position of prominence. And so this little child, who they would not have looked on with great regard and respect, is invited to Jesus' side, and he essentially says to them, the least will be the greatest. And I think we can learn something from this. First, I think we can learn to value children like Jesus did. Now, this will be lost on some of us because our culture really values children, the ones outside of the womb. Our culture really values children. We have Chuck E. Cheese, we have Disney World, and we will spare no expense to love on our children. However, in this culture, children had no value. Historical records, you can read this, indicate that people would leave their children on trash heaps. And people would come by, pick them up, sell them into prostitution or slave labor or gladiatorial games. This is what we call the least of these. The least of these. And we must fight for the least of these in our world. We must fight for the unborn. We must fight for the orphan. We must fight for the underprivileged. We must fight for the AIDS patient. We must fight for the mentally impaired. We must fight for the physically disabled. This is greatness, and this is what Jesus is telling his disciples. Stop jockeying for position. You want to know what greatness is? It's working for the least of these. The least of these. You need to know where greatness is found. It's found right through that hallway with women joyfully changing diapers while we're in here. And husbands and wives faithfully teaching children while we are in here. We learn from this story to value children like Jesus did. We also learn to despise pride like Jesus did. True greatness doesn't come with jockeying for position or fantasizing about a seat of honor. Instead, there is a position that you and I should seek. It's a diakonos. It's a deacon. As we seek to serve the table and not sit at the head of it. But we are in a generation of selfies and outlandish personalities. And we need a revival of selfless servants. I'll serve and I'll not be seen. We are so self-absorbed. We have an inexhaustible appetite for affirmation. Have you noticed this? As a matter of fact, I want to read to you a paragraph from a very popular book. And you're going to think as I'm reading it that I'm writing it or I just made it up or it's humor. It's not. This is a very popular book that millions of Americans are consuming. And I quote, "The earth turns its orbits on you. The oceans ebb and flow for you. The birds sing for you. The sun rises and sets for you. The stars come out for you. Every beautiful thing you see, every wondrous thing you experience is all there for you. Take a look around. None of it can exist without you. No matter who you thought you were, now you know the truth of who you really are. You are the master of the universe. You are the heir to the kingdom. You are the perfection of life," end quote. I'm thinking Muhammad Ali would even blush at that. If these men could walk with Jesus and still succumb to preoccupation, to self-preoccupation and pride, don't think that you can't. I'm not worried about any of you ceasing to be worshipers. I'm worried about you becoming narcissistic, which means that you remain worshipers, but you worship yourself. So you have to ask yourself some diagnostic questions. Like, am I upset if I am not praised for my work? Do I long to sit in privileged places? What goes on in my heart when I don't get what I feel like I deserve? Do I serve out of recognition that I could possibly get? Do I feel a sense of rivalry in ministry? You see, one of the evidences that you've missed the glory is that you jockey for position. Another evidence is that you're a critical person. Notice verse 49. Here John runs up to Jesus and he's going, "Okay, we saw this guy over here. He was casting out demons and he ain't one of us, so I stopped him." And John must have thought that he was going to receive an attaboy from Jesus. But it appears here that this act was an act of rivalry as the disciples saw someone being successful at what they failed in, casting out demons. So likely they are concerned about this man undermining their position of status in the kingdom. They just aren't getting that the kingdom of Christ is not a matter of status or achievement. It's a matter of grace. You can't work your way into it. And any seat you receive in it is out of grace. So there's an incorrect view that people go with this passage, and then there's a correct view. The incorrect view. They twist it for all sorts of bad reasons. It's been used to appeal to the fact that we shouldn't care about theological differences at all. Who cares if one group thinks this about the gospel and another group doesn't think that about the gospel? We all ought to work together. That's ridiculous. That's a misuse of the passage. That's not what it's saying. This passage is talking about the party spirit that exists among the disciples. And if there's anyone that preaches a different gospel, let him be accursed. Let's read the whole Bible, not just one verse. So that's an incorrect way to deal with it. Now here's the correct way. The disciples' opposition boils down to one fact. This man wasn't in their clique. He wasn't in their tribe. He wasn't in their group. They raised their group above the mission itself. And that, friends, is tribalism, not Christian ministry. And we are too tribal. And we can run into this at our church. Are they even reformed? Do they serve coffee? Heretics. Maybe that's just me. I know many of you would like coffee. We're never going to do that here. They serve heretics. They have special lighting that comes on and off. God isn't anywhere near that place. They're so old-fashioned, they do business meetings. God doesn't show up in business meetings. I can testify. I think that's actually true. There's a joke about a Baptist who died and went to heaven. It's not very theologically accurate, but I'll give it to you anyway. This Baptist died and he went to heaven. He went to the pearly gates. He knocked on the door. Peter opened it up. He says, "What's your name?" He says, says his name. Peter's like, "Okay, got you. Come on in." And so the Baptist walks on in. Peter is showing him all of magnificence of the kingdom, like lots of great, wonderful stuff. And he's opening up this door, and it opens up into an amazing kingdom, opens up another door. And then the Baptist is walking, and he tries to open up this door, and it's locked. And he asks Peter, why is this door locked? And Peter says, oh, that's where we keep the Presbyterians. The Presbyterians think they're the only ones here, and we don't want to let them know otherwise. I'm just kidding. If you're Presbyterian, I know we have some of you here. That's why I said it. All right. There are times when divisions are necessary. But we must understand there's a difference between preaching a different gospel and preaching the gospel differently. And you've got to work that out with the Bible open on your lap. If you see God using someone, be a friend, be a fan, be a prayer warrior, be an encourager, cheer them on. One of the evidences that you're missing the glory is you jockey for position. Another is you're a critical person. Lastly, if you make certain that no one will best you. Verse 51. The next scene has this caravan of Jesus traveling ahead to make preparations for the journey to Jerusalem. And a certain Samaritan village would not allow Jesus to stay the night. When the Samaritans learned that their destination was Jerusalem, they refused hospitality. You know, Samaritans and Jews hated one another. I'm actually dealing with that next week. This is more than just a college rivalry. This is not North Carolina and Duke. These tensions ran deep. And so the disciples, they asked Jesus, would you like us to call down fire on this village because they rejected you? I mean, the question's crazy. They just came down to see the glory of God. They actually saw Jesus go from his glory and then take on, if you would, humanity again, coming back down the mountain. And they said, would you like us to burn up this village because they rejected you? Like Jesus is going to go, wow, you love me so much that you would kill an entire village for me because they wouldn't allow us to. That is wonderful. I love you guys. Flame away. Flame away. No. Are you judgmental? Are you angry? Are you determined to get revenge? That's evidence that you've missed the glory. That's unrepentant sin. After spending an entire year with Jesus, they still had a mistaken view of his ministry. And you understand why. Because Jesus' mission in the incarnation was not to call down fire upon sinners and consume them. His mission in the incarnation was to be consumed by God's fire in the place of sinners.